Welcome to Practicing the Practices, a learning and experiential podcast geared towards helping you apprentice with Jesus. My name is Brad, and I'll be your host and coach today. In our first 6 episodes, we have focused primarily on various practices that help us cultivate a deep and meaningful relationship with our Heavenly Father. We're made for divine connection. In today's episode, we make a little bit of a shift, and we focus on cultivating deep and meaningful relationships with other humans. Because not only were we created for divine connection, we were created for human connection. You and I were made for community. We were made for and need deep, meaningful, spiritually formative friendships. Well, this is our 7th episode of Practicing the Practices, but our very first episode with a guest contributor. When I planned this episode on community, specifically on friendship, I said to myself, I need my good friend Chloe Poole on the podcast today, because Chloe can not only talk about podcasts from a principled or a theological perspective. I have been able to witness Chloe up close and personal, not only as my own friend, but I've seen her friend with others, and she can talk about the art of practicing friendship as well as anyone I know. So Chloe, welcome to Practicing the Practices.
Thanks, Brad. As soon as we're done with this, I'm going to call my friends and say, I was on a podcast where someone said, I practice friendship really well. And so you're so blessed to be friends with me.
Thank you,
I've
Chloe.
got it. It's recorded too. I'm so excited.
It is. We will then do an episode on humility and all of those things. So.
I'm not going to be here for that.
Well, Chloe, you are the pastor for community here at Fellowship Church in Knoxville at the Middlebrook congregation, a sister church to Fellowship West where I pastor. So you're thinking about community all the time. And we've been friends for a while, and we've had a chance to kind of grow in our friendship, which has given me a chance to observe you both personally. But as I said, I've seen you befriend other people. And I've even heard people describe you and say, you know, the way Chloe friends, the way Chloe engages in relationships is really transformative. That's a quote. So be encouraged by that. But man, I'm so excited to have you talk with me about the essential nature of friendship. So the iconic sitcom of my college and young adult years, aging myself a little bit here, was Friends. But it seems like every generation is familiar with Friends because they've watched it on Netflix or Paramount or whatever streaming platform it's on. And it's my, I don't think, very super controversial opinion that what made the TV show Friends super iconic was not that its humor was kind of unique or even, you know, the outstanding acting, but it was rather that it tapped in something into the human soul.
Oh, yeah.
That people saw on screen something that they wanted to experience, which was deep friendship, community, people who would be there in your life to celebrate your highs and your joys, but also to be there with you to kind of grieve and go through the hard stuff of life. But also to have somebody to have fun with, somebody to not be alone. So I think friendship is a hardwired aspect of our life. What do you say?
Yeah, I'm going to out myself and say I did not finish the show Friends. I only saw 3 seasons, but I absolutely think so. And I think especially in such an individualistic culture, we just struggle to even think that sort of friendship is possible. And so to see it portrayed on a television show taps into a longing that is just hardwired into us.
I agree. So why don't you talk a little bit about when you say hardwired, when you're talking about creation, unpack that a little bit more for me.
Yeah. So we are made in the image of God, and He is relational. And so it's not just that we want friendship. It's that we're designed for it. So it's why it feels like such a deep need. We're designed to, in order to be fully human in the way that God designed us, we have to express our design relationally. So yeah, it's not even, I think sometimes people feel really guilty about loneliness or their experience of disconnection. And when they feel that way, they're missing the reality that they really were made for connection.
Yeah. You're bringing up something that's really important is that oftentimes we don't know what to do or make of our desires. Like, is this a good desire, or is this some sort of desire wrought out of my flesh, my sinful nature?
Yeah.
But oftentimes our desires are a product or a function of our design. So God made us to have these desires. So these desires aren't, as you say, anything to feel shame over or feel guilt all over, or to kind of, say, get over it. It's actually something that your Creator put in you, and it's a good thing.
Yes. And even I think oftentimes, because we're in a broken world, we recognize that we display our relational design in a broken way sometimes. So then we kind of react and do we reactively think, okay, I must have it wrong, and it must be that I just shouldn't need people, or I'm just not good at friendship. And so that can just kind of create some confusion, I think, for a lot of people.
Let's kind of talk a little bit about that. I'm not good at friendship. So there are those people who
Wait, did you just say you're not good at friendship?
Well, I'm talking about it like in a hypothetical.
Okay. Okay.
So maybe I am, or maybe I'm not. But I think there's all of us have some struggle and some fractures with friendship. I'm in a season of life where cultivating particularly new friendships is really challenging.
Yeah.
I'm married. I've got 4 kids. My 4 kids are in a stage of life where they're busy, and I've got a demanding job. And so, high school, college life, where you had all of these hours to be in study groups.
Yeah. It's so much easier.
Yeah.
It's so much easier.
Coffee shop. And like, I've had to leave the coffee shop, right? So in some ways that makes, the fracture of friendship feel harder, because, man, losing this friend or this friend getting displaced is really hard. But even, as a dad who has kids who really make friends really easy and are super popular and get birthday invitations every day, and who has a kid who has never received a birthday invitation because friendship is just harder. Friendship is challenging because we do live in a broken world. Talk a little bit about how maybe our flesh, maybe even some of our childhood, some things might cause us to struggle with friendship. What makes friendship hard? Unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm thinking about family of origin. A lot of people learn from their earliest relationships how to have connection and attachment. And even if you had the best family, you still learn habits that are not helpful. All of us tend to self-protect in some way. And so we can be selfish about how we do relationships. I think no matter how well you see friendship modeled, whether it's your sinful tendencies that kind of tend to hijack relationships you have, or just even being wounded in friendship, you can start to do friendship differently. So there's just so much to unpack about how we each do friendship. What are our specific ways that things challenge us and are obstacles to us? And I think a lot of people don't make enough margin really to just learn about how they do relationships. And in a lot of ways, I think we're scared to know, it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to think, maybe I consistently hurt people in the same ways. Maybe I withdraw when people really need me, or I get really clingy whenever certain triggers happen. There's so much that I think we're afraid to know. And it ultimately comes down to the fact that, if you're not fully rooted in being the beloved of God, those topics feel really scary for you, because it is exposing, and you need grace from people in order to just press into those areas.
Yeah. So friendship is essential. It's important. We were designed, we were made for community. We're created by a communal God in the garden, Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. So you've got the Father, Son, Holy Spirit there. Talk a little bit about how the Trinity, these attributes of a God in community work.
Yeah, I love looking at how God does a relationship. And obviously, we don't see the full picture of God. I mean, he's so unknowable in some ways, and then we're also invited into relationship with him. But I think about the fact that God is fundamentally connected. So the Trinity is constantly in relationship with each other, and with us. But then they also are distinct. You don't see God the Father trying to be God the Son. Even if you think about like salvation, each of them had a unique role. The Son came and was embodied with us. And then he listened to the Father. He didn't try to be the Father. And then he promised to send us the Spirit and he wasn't jealous of the role of the Spirit. So there's this really beautiful way that God is both connected and also just distinct in each member of the Trinity, like having a specific identity. Mm-hmm. It's really beautiful. And I think in a lot of ways, it gives us a model for what we're looking for in our relationships. We don't want to be people who say, oh, I don't need anybody. But we also don't want to be people who say, hey, Brad, who you say I am is who I am. There's that reality of like having that distinct identity of who we are individually. And it's a hard balance that really takes the Spirit speaking into our lives every day.
And we really see this vision of community relationship manifest itself all the way into the New Covenant and New Testament. When Jesus launches his ministry, mm-hmm. he doesn't launch it as a solo act. The first thing he does is surround himself with these disciples. There's these apprentices. Now, of course, he's the rabbi, he's the teacher, but he functions in that group as someone who needs them, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this collective partnership. There's people who are providing meals, who are, negotiating lodging.
Yes.
There's all of these walking journeys. There's a day or 2 days they're walking down the road and they're talking about everything from deepest longings in their souls to what are we going to eat today?
Yeah. And that theme runs all the way through the Bible. God has a covenant people in Israel. He doesn't talk to like individual people. He talks to them collectively. And then in the New Testament, we see the church. And even if you look at how Paul writes his letters, he is writing it to a collection of people. He hardly ever uses singular nouns because he's not talking to individual people. So God just he tends to work in community. And I think we are the ones who, in our hyper individualistic culture, we're figuring out how to even do that anymore because it's foreign to us, but it was not foreign to God. There's a book I love and would recommend. It's called When the Church Was a Family. And the guy just talks about what it looks like to unravel our individualism in the Western church. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's challenging, but it will tap into your longing to be in really meaningful community.
Yeah. Well, I think even the most skeptic of listener probably knows deep down in their soul, I need friends. I want people in my life. Even the most introverted people wants a handful of people, right, for dinner. But one of the things I think sometimes we struggle with is the practice of friendship. Mm-hmm. So let's try to connect the dots between design. Here's how God has made us. Community is important to function. Like, what does it look like to cultivate, to build healthy friendships? Talk to me a little bit about practice.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, I think all of us need a little bit of a model to get us going. If you're somebody who you're listening to this and you just say, I don't even know where to start. Like, I don't have great friendships. And I am overwhelmed even thinking about starting that journey. And I know for me, I remember when I moved home from college and just knew no one in Knoxville. It was just so overwhelming to even think of starting that journey. So there's a book called Find Your People by Jennie Allen. It's awesome for if that's where you're at. And one of the things she talks about is how you need two things when you're in community. You need an inner circle. That's like 3 to 5 people who know you well. And if you try to expand beyond that, it just doesn't work. You can't have that many people who really know you on a deep level. And then you need an outer circle of like 10 to maybe even up to 100 people who just know you like 20 to 40%. And she calls it a tribe. Like we used to back in other cultures, and even in other cultures today around the world, people have really robust communities. And so, yeah, we're kind of like, we're unique in that we don't really know what it's like to have that sort of a robust community. But yeah, what do you think, Brad?
Well, there's a phrase you hear people say like, I'm looking for my people, or those are my people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this kind of broader circle of people who are there to support you. You're there to support them. You share joys together. Sometimes that might be, in a neighborhood that's really connected well. You might have neighbors and you barbecue and you hang out, and you can, instead of having to go to the grocery store, you have somebody you could just like hop down to their house, like two doors down, and get the cup of sugar that you need. But one of the things I think that's so important about this is we're kind of living in a historical time where our family dynamic is unique in that we oftentimes don't live surrounded by grandparents, aunts, uncles.
Yes.
When we're talking about tribe people, we actually might not have a lot of relatives around us.
Yeah.
Which actually makes our friendship network even more important.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, you've done the college thing. You've been in the journey. You probably have a lot of friends who are living here in Knoxville, where we're at, who don't have that. Maybe you've seen kind of how important a friendship network really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and building it can sound overwhelming, and in some ways it is. Whenever I first started building my outer circle, so Fellowship Middlebrook had First Thursdays, which is like a young adult gathering, and I just decided every time I go to that, I will know 3 people's names that I didn't know before. And then every month I would just go back. And it was amazing how in a room of 100 people, how quickly I actually started to walk in thinking, okay, I know some of these people. And from that pool, I started to meet people who I thought, wow, that person, I could see them eventually becoming part of my inner circle. So I think just taking steps to plant a few seeds, whether it's you walk into church and you're saying, hey, 2 people today, I will know 2 more people's names. That can just be huge because it adds up very quickly.
Yeah. So you just connected a practice to a model of friendship. So you're saying there's these 2 kind of groups of friends. There's this really inner circle who probably know things about you that other people don't because you've spent enough time with them to cultivate enough trust with them to let them in. They've demonstrated that they're worthy of that trust.
Yeah.
They can be the way they've honored you. And there's probably something reciprocal there. There's probably also some deep connection because you share something really in common with them.
Yeah.
People,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that you just said kind of about building that outer circle, a practice is instead of waiting to get connected, you initiated connection. Now, that can be hard depending on your personality. Some people are really out and they get energy.
Yeah.
Like, the salesperson who goes into a meeting and wants to make 100 new friends. That's not me. I'm whatever the opposite of that is, that's me. But there is a responsibility to not just wait for connection, but to actually pursue connection. So I love that this idea of, hey, I'm going into this space. I'm going to a church gathering. I'm going to this kind of community space, and I'm going to know 2 or 3 people's names.
Yeah. Yeah. It just even thinking about the number 2 or 3, that is attainable. It breaks down a huge crowd into really just a manageable task. But and I totally identify with I'm more introverted. And so this was a little bit of an overwhelming concept. But the more I did it, the easier it got because I started thinking more easily about like 1 or 2 good questions that were conversation starters. The more you practice it, the better, the easier it seems.
What are a couple of those questions I think our listeners would like to know? What's a good question? I'm coming into a space besides how's the weather? What do you do for a living? Like, what's a good question?
I tend to ask on your day off, what just really gives you life to do with your time? And I try to say it that way because a lot of times people feel like most people on their day off feel like the things that they do are boring or lame. But I'll say that. I'll say like, hey, and no pressure. It doesn't have to be you go on a 10-mile hike. Like just what are things? And it kind of gives you a chance to realize like what's a connector, something. And then I also love asking, what podcasts have you been listening to recently? Because most people do podcasts. Yeah. So it just gives you a chance to see like, what do they enjoy learning about? Yeah. What about you, Brad? Is there a kind of a new person connector question that helps you?
C.S. Lewis would describe what you're talking about is that you too factor, right?
Yes.
Oh, you too. Like, so I remember years ago when we first got to know each other, like I discovered like you really loved UT football.
Yes.
Like in a major way. Like
Yes.
we talked about your persona of sports club, right? And we even found ourselves like separately with a group of people watching the World Cup a few years ago.
Yes.
So
Oh, I forgot about that. That was so fun.
Yeah. So there was oh man, Chloe loves football. She loves sports. There's a common connection. But yeah, I think in a similar way, when I meet people in my stage of life who might have kids, one of the things that our parents are generally pretty happy to talk about is their kids. Like, tell me about your kids. Like, what are they into? What's your life like? Because it's pretty easy to find those things in common. Oh, your kids are into music. That's great. Or your kids are playing ball. Or what's a weekend? What's your favorite weekend? Are you into golf or those sorts of things? Because that's kind of how I'm wired. I'm a sports guy. I'm really active. I'm into those things. And
Yeah.
But I've learned over time to kind of be a little bit more agile and find connector points that might not be in my wheelhouse. But I love those questions. You're asking about something that is important to the other person. So one of the key things that I'm hearing here that I think when it comes to cultivating friendship as a practice is open, not with talking about yourself.
Yeah. People are so flattered just to have someone ask them questions. And I think we kind of forget, like, most people want to know that the person they're talking to finds them interesting. So we can sometimes become that person who just talks so much without really thinking, hey, does this person across from me feel like I take interest in them? So yeah, it can be huge just to even, if you get the conversation started, like, what are just some follow-up questions? How can you show them that you really do care about what they care about, even if you don't care about it,
So as we kind of move from outer circle of friends, people we have common interest with, we have, it might be in church or it might be in our school community or even work friends, but to that inner group of people whom I think we need in life because we need people who can actually know us. Not the Facebook, Instagram version of us, not even the work version of us, because oftentimes the work version of us is the best version of us.
Yes.
We're on,
Oh, absolutely.
we're performing, but people who can know the crappy side of us, right?
Yeah.
I'm worn out, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. Yes. You got the unenergized side of me that might have been a little sarcastic, that might have been indifferent or insensitive to what you're going through. Talk a little bit about cultivating that inner circle. Yeah. What are some key things? What are some key practices? What are some key kind of principles you've learned about, building deeper friendships where that kind of thing can exist, that kind of dynamic exists, and kind of keeping those friendships healthy?
Yeah. Well, so I was just going to make one note on something you said. It tends to be that the safer we feel with people, the more that they see kind of the crappier side of us, because when you feel safe, you let your guard down and you let people see that you're tired. Maybe you're a little bit grumpy. So as I was kind of exploring some relationships with people who were starting to become part of my inner circle, I'll just tell you what I did that felt helpful. And this will probably resonate more with women listeners. So I'd love to hear, Brad, kind of what are some things that you do with men that feel helpful. But there were two gals that we had just started to become closer, and we ended up getting Henry Cloud's book, Changes That Heal, which is all about, you learn about how we are designed for relationships, and then what tends to kind of thwart us as we're living in a broken and fallen world. And we just every Friday would get together for like 2 hours on a Friday morning. We were all off on Fridays at that point, and go through a chapter and just share like what were some things that came up as we were reading this. Sometimes it was nothing. Sometimes it was, wow, this really made me realize how I function in my family of origin and how I've carried that into friendships. And the sweet thing about that was it gave me an opportunity to get to know them better. But it also gave me a little bit of a heads up of like areas that might feel a little bit disruptive in their pursuit of me. Like maybe they're a little bit avoidant of conflict and they're sharing that with me. That's something that's helpful for me to know how I kind of approach them in those moments. So that was really sweet. Do you want to share it all about, I have one more I'm going to share, but any thoughts that are coming to mind for you with men?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of misnomers and false stereotypes out there. There's the idea that men don't want to talk about their feelings,
Oh, yeah.
or
Which
that
is
women
so,
feel, men
yeah,
think, all those
yeah.
things. I don't think those are true. I think sometimes those are in kind of that outer circle. There can be some tendencies there. But one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years in my tight inner circles with men is to regularly practice what I call honor and honesty. So we start with honesty, where we're just like, I've got a circle of guys. We'll get together at least once a month, and there'll be the regular banter. How's life going? What's work? Did this thing get worked out? Did you close that deal? How was your round of golf? But eventually, there's this kind of transition to, hey man, what's high and low right now? So like, what's going really well that we can celebrate, but also what's just really stinks in your life right
I
now?
love that. My friend Kennedy calls that your shade and your shine.
Oh yeah, that's good. So the longer we do that, the more vulnerable and honest we are about some of the low stuff, some
Yeah.
of the need for honesty, and sometimes that's confession of sin. Sometimes that's just talking openly about things we're struggling with,
Yes.
or naming what we're sad about.
Yeah.
Which, when you can get a group of guys to do that, all of a sudden something really powerful happens. But I really believe that has to be coupled with honor. And what I mean by honor is we try to call out the glory of God in each other.
Yes.
Like, let me point out something in you that's good, right, beautiful, that is there because God has put it in you, and I am seeing you exercise it. So it's both an opportunity for me to kind of expose the reality of my heart, the reality of my soul, and also to be encouraged.
Yes.
Those two things are really important because I'm able to release some power, but then also receive
Yes.
power.
Yes.
Or release the power that's being held over me, oftentimes by kind of my self-condemnation or whatever, but then receive encouragement, affirmation that's energizing.
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
Yeah. I think of when scripture says where two or three are gathered, there am I with them. And I've started to wonder, Brad, if there are ways God thwarts our ability to really do that, that introspection and that living in truth. I wonder if we're a little bit thwarted in doing it by ourselves because he wants us to be in community. I love what you said. That's a similar thing to what one of the practices that's really been beautiful for me. I have right now a group, and it's two gals in their 20s and 30s and three women in their 50s and 60s. And we just do a prayer night together once a month where, I mean, everything can be on the table because we've built that sort of trust. Like if you need to confess sin, if you've been believing lies, and sometimes you don't know you're believing lies until someone else in the room says, hey, I'm noticing that sounds like a lie or maybe an agreement you've made with the enemy. And it's just been so sweet. We will just kind of share, and then we'll just pray with each other and speak truth over one another. And I mean, it really is, it's the highlight of my month. It's hard work spiritually, but it is so meaningful. And that's what's beautiful. I think we're all really desiring the meaning that comes from deep, significant relationships.
Yeah. Well, I want to touch on one more aspect of friendship.
Yeah.
There's a lot we could say, but kind of for time constraints. Solomon said in Proverbs that a friend loves at all times, but a brother is born for adversity.
Yes.
And what that really means is there'll be people in our lives that we connect to, that we're like, man, you get me, I get you. We enjoy spending time together. We like each other. But when our house burns down, we call our brother, we call our sister up and say, hey, can I move in for a little bit?
Yes, it's
right?
so true. It's so true.
So you might not go to the movies all the time with your sibling. It might be with this person. So there's that dynamic. However, I think there is great value in diverse friendships.
Yeah.
Being friends, pursuing meaningful relationship with people who don't see the world as you do, or who haven't had the same cultural, socioeconomic, ethnic experiences as you. And so even just us kind of having this conversation about friends, while there's a lot of things I think we have in common, there's a lot of things about us that are different.
Yeah.
I'm a man, I'm a dad in my 40s. I've got 4 kids. I'm coaching T-ball.
Yep. I'm single, 31, female. Yeah, there's so many differences.
So talk a little bit about the value and benefit of diverse friendships, relationships too.
Yeah, I think that's the space where we really learn the skills of love. It is easy, relatively easy, to love people who are like you. But when you're one anothering someone who is not like you, I even think of, just for me, learning to care for my friends whenever they start having kids, and not saying, you know what, no, I'm going to go find my single friends. And especially with things like, multicultural friendship, like it exposes something in us whenever we start to learn about the challenges that other people are experiencing. And it really can reveal, it can teach us, and it can also reveal some of our flesh and our selfishness of, we do tend to want to just practice easy friendships where we immediately have commonality. So I think it's both a really beautiful learning environment, and it also, I think, really works against our flesh in ways that bring a lot of redemption and transformation in our lives.
I cannot agree more. I love the phrase you said. You said something about sharpening the skills of friendship. That, these are things that we have to exercise. And sometimes in our more diverse friendships, it requires a greater deal of effort.
Yes.
It requires a greater deal of humility, of empathy and understanding.
Yes.
But when you think about the church as a missional force for flourishing, for the kingdom of God, for good, what an opportunity. We live in such a polarized society where there is so much relational carnage, right? You've got, hyper political partisanship where, Democrats and Republicans can't be friends. People who see, these various issues or ways to solve issues, but even in the fracture between male-female relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's sexual assault and harassment.
Yep, church abuse.
Yeah. We have not learned to take male-female friendship, to see each other as brother and sister.
Yes, you do that really well, Brad. I feel like you gave me a lot of hope in that category, because so often when we see those abusive or difficult situations, we can be reactive and go to another extreme, when the whole point is having brother-sister relationships where we are learning to have humility and to be transformed into the image of Jesus. And he did relationship with women, even though he was a man. He did that so well.
Well, it's so important to learn to love beyond the physical, but even the personality, to learn to love someone's soul, to see them like, this person was created in the image of God.
Yeah.
God loves them. And so I'm a disciple, I'm an apprentice of Jesus. I've needed to move towards them in love. Now, that may not always be hanging out 3 or 4 nights a week.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it does mean my disposition towards them, my value of them is going to be really, really high.
Yeah. Can I share one very practical skill to learn or practice in friendship?
Please.
I think forgiveness is one of the least talked about aspects of friendship. If you want long-term relationships, you have to learn to forgive. And I had a friend who, she would play the song "The Blessing" by Bethel and just think about people that she was struggling to forgive while she was doing it. And it created a space for her and the Lord to really sit in that place of hurt, but also of saying, I want to be able to release. I learned, realizing that I was bad at forgiveness was very helpful in me learning how to be a better friend. So,
wow. Forgiveness is hard.
It is so hard.
And probably deserves its own
episode.
episode.
We'll have to do that.
So in a few months, when we're focused on the practice of forgiveness, we'll have you to come back and maybe share some of those stories.
I'd love to.
But Chloe, thanks so much for taking some time to just talk
thanks for having me
about the value of friendship, its essential nature, but also some ways to pursue friendship. Well, as always, thanks so much for listening to us and for practicing with us. To make sure you receive future episodes of Practicing the Practices, make sure you subscribe on your favorite platform, follow, hit those notification alarms. Until next time, this is Brad and Chloe praying grace and peace on your life and on your friendships.